Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Meet Me at the Spot. I'm your host, Holly, and this week I am really excited to share my conversation with Lauren. So, Lauren, who goes by That Abortion Doula online, is a clinic escort, public health student, and a full spectrum doula specializing in abortion support. She comes to this work through her own reproductive experiences and approaches it from a reproductive justice lens. She is passionate about destigmatizing and demystifying all reproductive experiences. I'm so excited. I had never heard of an abortion doula before I started following Lauren on TikTok, and I hope you all will learn just as much as I have. So let's turn it over to my conversation with Lauren. Welcome, Lauren, to the podcast. So excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been following you on social media for a while. So I know like a little bit about you, but I'll get to know more about you as this conversation goes on. But for the listeners, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, what you're all about.
Yeah, so I am a full spectrum doula, and I specifically specialize in supporting people who are seeking access to abortion care. And that's the role that kind of got me started on this journey. And since kind of starting in that role, I've expanded. I've gone back to school. So now I am studying public health education, and I really hope to concentrate in postgraduate studies on reproductive health experiences as well as sexual education. I'm also neurodivergent. I self-identify as autistic. I'm the parent of a diagnosed autistic child. And yeah, that's just a little bit about me. Just to add a few things about like my volunteer work. So I'm also a clinic escort, which for folks who don't know, clinic escorts are people who volunteer outside of abortion clinics. And we're there to help patients navigate protester interactions and things like that, just to help folks get in there smoothly and safely with as little hubbub as possible. And I also volunteer for my local abortion fund, and I'm very involved there. Most people are like, wow, that's a lot. And I'm
Yeah.
like, and to be fair, kind of off the record, I'm actually the chair of the board of directors of my local abortion fund, but we don't really advertise who's on the board. And so like I will mention it casually, but it's not something that I like to advertise broadly. And also recently, my opinions about practices within the broader abortion industry have upset some clinics that the abortion fund works with. And I've had to be like, all of my opinions are my own. I'm not speaking for them, but I'm also not the only one who thinks it.
Right? Oh, I always love to ask because I'm nosy. What got you really interested in this work? Because I know you were not in kindergarten when being asked, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you're like, I want to be an abortion doula and I want to escort people who are getting an abortion. Unless you were,
Yeah.
and then that's a whole other story.
No, I wasn't. Sometimes I wish I was because it was kind of the opposite. So, I identify as an ex-evangelical. I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church, and so there's a lot of religious trauma there. I did identify as quote unquote pro-life for most of my adolescence, actually. It wasn't until number one, I started to deconstruct, which was mostly based on the fact that I'm also queer, I'm bisexual, and so I had to kind of begin the deconstruction process for my own sake in that way. But then I also had an ectopic pregnancy and required abortion care to, safely terminate that pregnancy and preserve my fertility. And then 6 months later, I became pregnant with my son. And that kind of full circle story of like how abortion care was an integral part of the way my family became my family. It kind of cemented for me, number one, that like abortion is healthcare, and also that all of these reproductive experiences from your first period all the way to menopause, these are all interconnected and they all deeply impact us and our well-being. And they're so stigmatized and we don't talk about it enough. And so it lit a fire under me to start talking about it more, and to be there for other people. I think I like to say I'm the person that I needed at, 19, when I was going through my ectopic pregnancy. Like, I so much wish that I could go back and tell younger me all of the things I know now about that experience that she was going to go through and what it meant and what it doesn't mean and just how impactful it would be.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I talk about this all the time on the show that I want to make a Venn diagram of all of the people who go into some sort of reproductive health work with neurodivergency and previous religious trauma, because that is a full circle with like almost everyone. I'm like, how'd you get into this work? Well, let me tell you about my neurodivergent religious trauma background. And I was like, figured that was going to be the case. I always try not to laugh when people say it because it's just so wild that it is that way. I'm so fascinated to learn more
Hmm.
because I did not know an abortion doula was a thing until I think I came across your TikTok channel. I'm gonna be real honest. I had a doula for my birth, and loved every second of it, but I didn't know what a doula was until I started really getting into like reproductive justice work and uh I met a doula and I was like, wait, what's a doula and what do they do? Once I learned, I'm like, what? And then there's like postpartum doulas. I had no idea that was even a thing. That would have been helpful. And then coming across your page and I'm like, abortion doula? Yes, that just makes absolute sense. So if you could talk a little bit about what an abortion doula kind of does, what that looks like as you're helping to navigate with someone through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's important to note that like every abortion doula practice is different, right? So just for point of reference, I do this as a like this is the way I show up for my community and I give to them and they very much give back to me. So I don't charge for my services for the most part. Um I just exist as a community resource and I put myself out there in my local community and in some online spaces to be a person that can be there when folks need that kind of support. There are doulas who charge for that service or might have like a sliding scale kind of deal going on. So it can look different for everybody. A big part of what I do is a lot of like logistical and resource coordination, right? So there's definitely a huge component of emotional support, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But like the the most pressing issue that most people come to me with is I don't know where to go. I don't know how much money I need. I don't know where I would get the money. I have no idea where to begin. So we're looking at, just starting with the basics of like, okay, are we going to a clinic? Are we going to utilize telehealth options? Are we going to have to travel out of state? What are the big barriers and where are we going? Once we kind of get that narrowed down, then we start talking about like, okay, financial and logistical support. That's when the conversations about abortion funds and practical support organizations come in. And if I can, I will help them if they're super overwhelmed and like they're like, I have 6 places to call. Can you help me call one or two? If they give me permission to call on their behalf, I might call one or two places on their behalf and do some like behind the scenes work. It's also great because I have connections in a lot of these areas. And so um, I'm able to connect with people and kind of figure out who has funding, who doesn't have funding right now, like who should we call first, who should we call second. Um, and once we get through that part where, okay, we've got all of the logistics sorted, an appointment is scheduled, they know where they're going and what they're doing, then that's when it goes into more of the emotional component where people have questions about, is it normal to feel this way? Is it normal to feel that way? They start wanting to share more about the circumstances. A lot of people feel the need to justify their decisions to me, which is always like, I'm glad to be a landing space for people if they need to unload that. And I want people to know that you don't have to tell me if you don't want to. Just because I'm helping you doesn't make me obligated to know any more about your circumstances. And you don't, if you're not comfortable being that vulnerable, I don't want anybody to feel like they have to do that in order to get support. But there's also another big piece of what I do, kind of the third big piece aside from the emotional support of validating people's feelings, letting them know this is normal, making sure they have ample resources to reach out to, whether that's talk lines for folks, whether that's a list of therapists that are affirming of their choice, those kind of things. There's also an educational component. So I'm not a medical professional. I'm not on here giving anybody medical advice. But what I can do as a doula is provide education on general what to expect, what is normal, what is considered not normal, how do things usually look. And that is extremely comforting for a lot of people. Just being able to say, okay, here you can expect A, B, and C, and then X, Y, and Z. And this is what that's going to look like. Here's how many people are typically in the room. You know, here's what the conversation is usually like. I can kind of give them examples of the counseling information if they're in a state where there's state mandated counseling. So we can kind of talk through what they can expect from that. Um, and yeah, that is a really key component to easing people's anxieties because I very much do not ever sugarcoat the reality. Like I am very frank with people. It is typically painful. Your individual pain tolerance and your individual circumstances are going to depend on how painful it is. I'm not going to shy away from those things. And that's okay because just knowing what to expect and setting expectations, even for the worst case scenario, is what helps prepare people and it does, in a way, reduce harm and decrease trauma. If you are not expecting a certain amount of blood and all of a sudden there is a certain amount of blood, or you thought this was going to feel like a period and you think you're feeling labor contractions, you're going to have a very emotional, like strong reaction to that because it is scary if it's not what you were expecting. And so I value very much not just telling people what the average experience is, but being like, here's like the best case scenario, here's like the worst case scenario. Hopefully you'll be somewhere in the middle and that'll be perfect. But if not, you're prepared either way.
Yeah, I love that you walk through that kind of process because I'm someone who needs that level of information whenever I'm getting something done. I'm such a baby. I have the lowest pain tolerance. And so for me, I need to know like this is kind of what is in the normal-ish range for a lot of people.
Hmm.
When's the time when I'm like, maybe I should, go to the hospital or call my provider or like where do I get to that point, right? And so I think that's really important that you talk about that and you don't shy away from that. That's really really helpful. I'm thinking about like how
Yeah.
I would need care.
Well, and I think there is like this very standardized way that we talk about abortion, medication abortion specifically, because you don't want to only give someone the horror stories, right? Like, yes, there are people who've had very traumatic experiences. Yes, there are people who have had to deal with complications. And statistically, that's a very small percentage of people. But if by chance you are one of that small percentage of people, I want you to be informed but not scared. And it's a lot of the same concepts that I think labor doulas talk through a lot, right? It's just about wanting folks to have the information so that they are prepared for all of the outcomes. Um, and very much like in my practice as a labor doula, I think sometimes people perceive birth and labor doulas as like helping you shape this magical experience. That's not typically how I approach it, and my clients know that before they invite me into their space. I approach it as we want to accommodate you in every way possible. We want to make sure you are comfortable and that you feel safe and secure and that you know what's going on. And also, I'm never going to tell you that like there's no chance that you'll have a C-section or, I'm never going to like argue about the necessity of something that a doctor is saying is necessary. And it's very much so just trying to provide the context and comfort in the situation. And that translates a lot to abortion doula work. It's about providing context and comfort in the situation, not about trying to change an outcome or make the process rainbows and unicorns.
I think that's a really good point. I knew for me when I was pregnant, I knew I wanted a doula right off the bat because my spouse is a great human being. And I knew that in a high stress situation, they were not going to be the most helpful, strong person I needed. I'm so passive. The doctors could be like, we're going to do this, this, and this. I'd be like, oh, okay, sure, if that's what you say. So to have somebody on my side, right? Like, I knew what kind of music I wanted playing. I knew what kind of like vibe that I wanted. I knew I would prefer to be on my side um while delivering, which I for the most part was. But even the medical providers were like, "All right, it's time to start pushing if you want to get on your back." And my doula was like, "She seems to be really comfortable on her side. Can she stay on her side? Is that okay?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, you can stay on your side." So it was so nice having someone there who knew, like, best case scenario, how I would love for my birth experience to look, and who was cheering me on. And I honestly, I gave her my phone because she was like, if you want me to take some pictures, I can. Do you want just all like the really glamorous shots? I'm like, no, no, give it all, like take it all. And I didn't know she was taking video, but she captured video of my child being born, and I have that memory forever. And it's so magical because it's like, it was such a magical moment. For me, I was very fortunate to have a very low-key delivery, but also just reliving, like hearing the doctor and the nurses and my doula and my spouse going like, "You got this," like cheering me on, like reminding me that I'm such a badass. Like it's such an amazing memory to have. And such an amazing human to walk through all of the things that could happen, like you were talking about. Here's best case scenario. And there's all these other things that you might want to think about, like pain management, right? And my cute self originally was like, I'm gonna try to just labor as much as I can. I did labor at home for a very long time, like 30 something hours at home before I went to
Mm.
the hospital. As soon as I got to the hospital and they're like, we're admitting you, I'm like, they go, have you thought about pain management? Yes, epidural. I cannot
Yeah,
do this anymore. But knowing that, like, that's an option that I had, knowing that, like, the birth plan was really like the birth wishes and that
yeah,
things are going to change. At any time, things could change. I was a advanced maternal age pregnancy.
I hate that so much. I hate that framing.
So I laugh because to me, the medical providers were always like, please don't get offended because you're gonna hear high risk and it's only because of your age. But like that's a like white male doctor like standard
Yeah,
and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't get offended at all. I wear it as a badge of honor. So but I knew like anything could have changed, right? In the
yeah,
moment, who knows what could happen. And so knowing what the options were, knowing having all of the information in front of me so that I could make the most informed decisions, it was the best thing I ever did. And having someone in my corner who wasn't part of my care team, who didn't work at the hospital, but who was there to support me. And my experience was just awesome. It was really, I highly recommend it to everybody. Get yourself a doula. It's the
so
best.
I didn't have a doula.
Mm.
So again, I turned 21 at about 20 weeks pregnant.
Oh wow.
Um, so I entered into parenthood at a very young age.
Mhm.
My frontal lobe developed with my toddler, and it's a beautiful life. I'm very happy with it. But so I did not have a doula. My partner, who I love dearly, he tried his best. He
Mm-hmm.
really, really did. Um, and I look back and I'm just like, I have to have another baby just so I can have a doula because I need this experience.
Yes. And I tell everyone, I'm like, listen, half the crap you're going to put on your registry, you're never even going to use. Put on your registry for people to contribute to help you pay for a doula. Worth every
Yeah.
penny. The best thing you could do, hands down. Best thing you could do. So I imagine with being an abortion doula especially, but in this field of being a doula and working on reproductive health lens, that you have to be constantly paying attention to all of the things going on and the everyday changing of the landscape of abortion specifically, right? And especially when you were talking about helping people virtually, for example, and do they need to travel? Do they need to figure out an abortion fund in a different state? And knowing what that looks like, it's like day to day sometimes. I feel like you just don't know what's going to happen every day. If you talk a little bit about what that looks like for you.
So, I'm really plugged in all these different ways. And so it's like information always trickles in one way or another. If it's not from like a TikTok group or the clinic escorts or the volunteer with the abortion fund, like I'm getting the information from somewhere. I can't remember it all. So like a lot of times I will have to look things up to kind of help people. It's very overwhelming. And I think there are a lot of things to be concerned about. I think one thing we've been watching pretty closely recently is out of Texas, the AG has indicted an telehealth abortion provider who provided someone medication in Texas. So, that's a big fear because then we start to worry about things like interstate travel and how much providers and people who are doing the kind of support work that is most targeted, like people who volunteer with abortion funds, how safe is it for them to travel to red states? What does that look like? I think it's just a lot
Yeah.
all of the time. I'm really grateful for folks like Jessica Valenti
Mm.
and like Mel on medicine. I don't know if you follow them, but they're a med student training to be an OBGYN, and they cover stories about abortion related deaths and things like that. Those are the kind of stories that like I try to talk about, but truthfully, it gets super heavy and I have to take my time to grieve that loss in private. I can't continually put that on display on my platform. It just is not emotionally sustainable for me. So I'm very grateful for folks who are doing that work and who are able to sit there and tell these stories and bear that burden. And so I try to keep up with that. I think the thing I would say that like I'm trying to sort through most right now is understanding the impacts on miscarriage management care and what that looks like. Um, it is incredibly unpredictable right now, it seems. And it's very stressful for me in all of my roles to not know like what are we supposed to be telling people, right? I'm very concerned about the availability of miscarriage management care, and I'm very concerned about the fact that it's happening in such a whack-a-mole kind of way. It's very difficult to mount a coordinated resistance effort or even educational effort when these things seem to happen very randomly for very little reason other than just like fear from doctors and lawyers at different times. And it just is so random and so unpredictable that is continuing to be a huge concern for me personally as the legal landscape continues to evolve.
Be sure to check back next week for part 2 of my conversation with Lauren as we continue talking about reproductive health and being an abortion doula. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Meet Me at the Spot. I'm your host, Holly, and this week is part 2 of my conversation with Lauren. If you missed last week's episode, go back, check out part 1, and then come on back here for part 2. Let's jump right back into my conversation with Lauren. I don't know if I've ever publicly talked about this on the podcast. Maybe I've mentioned it, but for a very long time, I was very much like, no, I do not agree with abortion, unless in cases of like rape or incest, right? And so, and now like the more that I've educated myself and learned and like, wait, what I'm saying is, what I'm thinking in my head is that in order for someone to receive healthcare, their body needs to be violated, right? And like, that's pretty messed up. So, the more I learned and the more I got into this work, the more I started to shift my opinion greatly. And now I'm like, I'm pro-abortion. Listen, if you want to get an abortion, get an abortion. And people are like, nobody's using abortion as birth control. I'm like, and even if they are, I don't care. It's a weird way to do it, but if that's a
It's
choice
a
that's
very
for them,
expensive habit,
had to, uh,
very resource intensive. Like,
and especially
it
now,
is.
right? But like, if that's working
Yeah.
for you, so that you're not having a pregnancy that you are not wanting to have, okay, who am I to judge? It just doesn't impact my life. So all of that and to say like folks who are very much against abortion are very focused on just abortion and not recognizing that when someone has an ectopic pregnancy, when someone is having a miscarriage, the procedure is an abortion.
Let me tell you, they are a mess. Dipping into my clinic escort experience. If you follow me on TikTok, you know I have a playlist called Becky's Talk. Our main like anti-choice protester with a mic is a lovely white woman whose name is Becky. Incredible coincidence. And she knows that I am an ectopic pregnancy survivor, and she loves because we don't engage. So I'm not going to talk to her no matter what, but she loves to tell me that I did not have an abortion, that that is not what abortion is. And I'm like, just stonewall, just spray rock them. But in my head, I'm like, who are you to tell me? And like, also, what kind of weird game of semantics is this?
Right.
I had a dose of methotrexate, and that ended the pregnancy. Abortion is used to describe both like spontaneous pregnancy loss and intended pregnancy loss. And trying to separate those two is this kind of really sick black and white thinking that it just isn't rooted in reality, right? Like it's really impossible to be honest about what abortion is, about what pregnancy loss is, about what pregnancy is to begin with without acknowledging that like this is deeply nuanced and complex and like there are a lot of things that we don't know about our own existence and how life is and comes to be and all of those things. You don't get to decide for somebody else. It's just immoral to think that you are so superior that you get to say no, 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 you're wrong and I'm right about this. And
Mhm.
to say that you get to be the arbiter of another person's experience. You get to tell them the kind of healthcare they received, and that because the intention wasn't to harm the pregnancy, but was to help me, it doesn't count. Like, it's so bizarre.
Wild. It is so wild. Um, the weaponization a lot of times of religion, unfortunately, to justify um, being so anti-abortion. And like I said before, I'll never understand why you care so much about the healthcare decisions of another person that literally changes zero things about your life. I don't get upset if someone gets knee surgery. Like could you imagine if I was outside like the hospital, like the surgery wing, like you can't give knee surgeries, like they got the knees that they got.
Oh, it's just so illogically inconsistent. And
Yeah.
I think it's what gives me the most hope is that we do have several clergy members, including a Baptist clergy member who are escorts and they get to be there with all of those people. They definitely have a target on their back because these protesters very much are completely dumbfounded by the existence of a pastor who would lovingly protect somebody's ability to access healthcare. And it brings me a lot of peace as an ex-evangelical to be in those spaces with progressive Christianity. It's not the kind of thing that I want to dive into again being a Christian. I'm very happy not being a Christian, but it heals a small piece of my soul. And it just makes me find comfort in traditions and practices from my childhood that were for a long time tainted by the hatred of anti-abortion, anti-LGBTQ, conservative, evangelical practices.
And I have to imagine like someone who's a member of clergy and being able to relate to these folks on a different level because they know how to speak the language a little bit, right?
Hmm.
Whereas I have to stop myself anytime I've driven past like an abortion clinic, like a Planned Parenthood or whatever, see these folks outside with their highly inaccurate signage. I'm like, don't pull over. It's not worth it. It's not, don't pull over because I can create more of a scene and that's not helpful to anybody. There are clinic
Right.
escorts there. There are people who are doing the work. Like, in the work that I do and the organizations that I, really partner with a lot for protests and things like that, we're very intentional that we do not hold any of our protests at an abortion clinic ever because it creates a problem and it creates an even bigger unsafe situation for someone who's just trying to get healthcare. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's super important that there are clinic escorts. I give so much credit because I'm too outspoken and I just couldn't do it. Every time I go to a protest, my spouse has to be like, behave. Please don't get yourself into trouble. I'm like, I can try my best, but I can't guarantee that. I'm not going to create a problem, but I will solve a problem if need be, but I will not create a problem. I can give you that
Yeah.
one.
And I think it is important to say here, like, we're definitely not perfect. So, like, for example, last Saturday, I think it was, Becky was on her ectopic pregnancy spiel, and I just turned around and started screaming, "Kiss my ass, kiss my ass, kiss my ass, kiss my ass," and shaking my ass in front of her. Because sometimes you just snap. And like the thing about that is the way the organization that I volunteer for, the way we kind of manage that, and we're a very decentralized, non-hierarchical organization. We're not even like a 501(c)(3. We're just a group of people who show up, and that works really well for us in our context. Um, it's just like dual accountability. So like if I'm getting riled up, somebody's gonna come say, "Hey, Lauren, like let's go take a walk real quick. Like let's go regulate. Let's bring the temperature down." Because as much as we are people, we are also still 100% just there to help patients. And me, singing Kiss My Ass to Becky is just it's not helpful for them. And that's fair. So that's the big thing is that, you're not ever expected to be perfect. The goal is to just be able to be in community in those moments, to feel comfortable when people say, "Hey, let's go off to the side," so like bring the temperature down and not feeling defensive or like concerned, like, "Oh, have I done something wrong?" Because there's no punitive nature to it whatsoever. Like big mistake or little mistake, there's not going to be any condemnation from us as a group. We're just going to be like, okay, here's what we're going to do differently next time.
Mhm.
And how can we support you in doing whatever you need? So yeah, the big thing is to just always be cognizant that we're there for the patients and be willing to be in community with other people. And it works out really well for us.
That's a good reminder that we're all humans and there is no human that is perfect. I certainly am not. I will not ever sit on a podcast or anywhere and claim to be this like superior human being because I may have made a lot of mistakes and I will probably continue. No, I will definitely continue to make mistakes because I am human, but I learn from them and grow from them. Like you said, you take that experience and you say, how can we do better next time? How can we best support you? How can, when you're getting riled up, is there a signal, right? Like working through those things
Yeah.
is so important. to recognize and then to also have like each other's backs in that moment is great.
Absolutely.
This is my least favorite part of the podcast. I hate this part because it goes by so fast and I like this is a topic that's obviously super important, especially now, to keep talking about abortion and the work that you do as a doula, but specifically the work that you're doing as an abortion doula, I think is incredible. I was trying to think of like a more profound word, but I was like, no, it's just really freaking awesome. So I always like to ask my guests as we wrap up, is there anything you were hoping we would talk about and we didn't? And or what is some parting advice for the listeners that you have?
Okay, I'll just go with some like parting advice for folks who like really care about abortion right now and who really want to get involved. So the number one thing I want to say is, and like I say this with a lot of love and appreciation for the work that Planned Parenthood does, but please, for the love of God, diversify who you're donating to. Planned Parenthood does incredible political advocacy work. However, their fundraising apparatus is not set up for your dollars to go to abortion care. If you want your dollars to go towards abortion care, and I know many of you do, please, please go to the National Network of Abortion Funds.org and find your local abortion fund, become a member, and make that your anchor fund. So you're doing like a monthly donation. That is going to be incredibly helpful. I can tell you that abortion funds are the vanguard of bridging the gap in access to abortion care. We are the people who are doing our very best to make sure that people can cross state lines when they need to make sure that minors are able to access things like judicial bypasses and that undocumented folks are able to access know your rights and all kinds of other things while also getting access to this care. We are always going to be doing our best and need your support now more than ever. Also, like just really educate yourself about abortion as much as you can. Understand there are a lot of myths about abortion and there's a lot of stigma around abortion. And that can even penetrate into mainstream media that are perceived as like left leaning. For example, the New York Times wrote an article about some concerns regarding Planned Parenthood this week, and they used the phrase botched several times to refer to abortions that resulted in complications. That is so terrible. Please, there's a small percentage of abortions that result in complications like a failed abortion, where the abortion is not complete and the pregnancy continues, or um, an incomplete abortion, where the abortion starts but does not finish, and so an infection can develop. Those things are real medical complications, right? And we want folks to be educated on them, prepared for them, and to be able to get prompt treatment for them. But that does not equal botch. Just like you get an infection from a root canal, you didn't get a botched root canal. You just got an infection from your root canal. Like it's not comparable. So just being aware of those things, I think, is super important. Making sure you're looking out for that stigmatizing language and challenging it and thinking deeply about it.
I love that. And I will put the ways that folks can connect with you on social media in the show notes. But I'm really so thankful. I was so excited when you agreed to be on the podcast because I have been following you for a while and you have been on my like list of guests to ask. So I knew season 3, like, listen, I'm coming out season 3, bang, bang, bang. And so we got to talk about this stuff and we got to keep talking about abortion and keep normalizing these discussions because it's healthcare.
Absolutely.
And I just appreciate all the work that you do and keep doing it, keep staying strong throughout this. I like to be the little optimist and like this too shall pass. Throughout history, there have been very hard moments and collectively as groups of people, we have persevered and we can only get stronger from here. I'm going to put that energy out there into the world.
And you know what? So I'm actually graduating in May with my bachelor's degree. And so I am putting an Angela Davis quote on my cap. And it says, sometimes we have to do the work even when we don't see a glimmer on the horizon that it will be possible. that's the mood right now because it's like I'm doing all these things. I keep moving forward with my education and hope that one day I will be able to use my insights to do some research and to think about things on a population level and to write and publish and share this information on a broader stage. And right now that seems really far off, but we're going to keep doing the work anyway.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. What a beautiful way to end the podcast. Well, thank you again.
Oh,
I'll definitely have to have you come back and talk all of
I'd
the
be happy
stuffs.
to.
Oh, you are just a delight. And again, appreciate you and thank you so much.
Dude, I appreciate you so much.
Another huge thank you to Lauren for being on the show. It was so amazing getting to learn what an abortion doula is and what they do and how necessary it is for us to support doulas just in general. I will post all of the resources around access to abortion, including the National Abortion Funds, for you to support if you are able to. And just once again, thank you, Lauren, for being amazing and doing the work that you do.